This October, the wrong station celebrates a decade of dread. You can read the show notes to discover terrible new ways to celebrate with us. Today's episode, Great Bird of Africa, is written by Alexander Saxton and performed by Anthony Botelho. In the humid night of the grand menagerie at Susa Palace, yellow eyes gleamed from blue shadows in the saw-toothed leaves. 3 soldiers had built a fire and were slowly roasting peacocks on a spit. They were dressed in clean new tunics, for their armor had rotted to rags in the Indian jungle. They were used to the heat, though, for their skins had burnt to brick in the Gadrosian sun. What do you think they're up to back home? It had been 11 years since they'd crossed into Asia. Clytus laughed. Firelight didn't quite fill the pit of his missing eye. Well, we've got an expert on civilian life right here, don't we? He clapped Zimius on the shoulder. Why don't we ask him? Zimius hunched his shoulders. He was the smallest of the 3, and a Greek. When the Macedonians got drunk, they bullied him. And they liked to be drunk as much as possible. Are we really doing this again? Good heavens, Zimius! Clytus put a hand to his own chest. Have I misread you? Are you some sort of military man? I've been in all the same battles as you. Been at? Clytus frowned, turned to the other Macedonian. Belacris, have we ever been at any battles? The big man emptied his cup. Fought in 'em. He smiled at his friends. Eyes watched the soldiers from the darkness. Never just been. Why do I even drink with you 2? The Greek poured wine dregs into the fire. Out of the dark, the great king's beasts flared their nostrils, smelling weakness. Clytus gave an elaborate shrug. Maybe you hope we'll tell you what a battle's like. Zimius said nothing and refilled his cup. This was the 6th time, though he'd lost count. Even after years of drinking with Macedonians, his head had never really gotten used to it unwatered. But he drank that cup down as well. The Macedonian shared a glance. A 7th refill. Then Zimius leaned forward, his voice slightly shrill as he thrust fingers into their face and started counting off. The Granicus, he told them. Hit by a javelin and almost drowned in the river. That doesn't count as fighting, Clytus said. That's getting fought. I was in the phalanx at Issus. In the center. Belacris dug blunt fingers through a bowl of dates, finding one he liked the look of. Barely counts. Now you could see the whites of Zimius's eyes. I killed 6 men and got hit in the head with a brick at the siege of Tyre. Siege doesn't count as a battle, said Belacris. I nearly died. You took a little nap, said Clytus, and then you got to put your feet up while the rest of us walked to Egypt. I was in the phalanx again, at Gaugamela. The hoots and cries of caged beasts fell silent as Zimius's voice rose. I got shot in the neck. Clytus leaned forward. He'd lost half his teeth at that same battle. Those that remained gleamed in the firelight. Were you? We didn't see you there. I was in the phalanx at Gaugamela. The phalanx? Or a phalanx? The Greeks had been held in reserve, seeing action only toward the end of the battle. "You bastard," said Zimius. "You motherless son of a Melosian whore." Clytus's grin spread from ear to ear, but Belacris's own smile faltered. He'd never seen the little Greek like this. He wondered if they'd gone too far. So he raised a joke toast, hoping to break the tension. "The Queen Mother." Alexander's mother was a Melosian, and the king unpopular with his soldiers just now. But neither of the others seemed to appreciate or even hear his little joke. They were both leaned over the fire, staring at each other, and with genuine hatred on their faces. He could feel something building on the air, and it made him afraid. That sharp, febrile mix of hate and fear is like the air before a battle. "You surprise me, Zimius," purred Clytus, resorting to base language. "I thought you Greeks were good with words." "Clytus, maybe we should stop for a while," said Belacris. "We know how to use our fists as well," said Zimius. "Friends," said Belacris. "If that's the truth," said Clytus, "why is your king a Macedonian?" "Clytus, we have no king." The Greek was on his feet. "We are independent allies." "You're slaves," said Clytus, leaning back. "You're just not smart enough to know it." Zimius's face turned red. He made a strangled noise and turned and hurled his bronze cup into one of the nearby cages. It struck a great rhinoceros of India on its face, drawing blood, and the plated creature groaned and turned aside and crashed into the brazen bars of the far side of its enclosure. It cowered there, with its eyes shut tight. "Here it is," laughed Clytus. "The eloquence of Greece and the race of Homer." "Clytus, that's enough." Belacris half rose, putting his hands out between them, because, for a moment, he thought Zimius had been about to hurl himself across the fire at Clytus. But he wasn't steady on his feet, his head spinning slightly, and he wished he wasn't drunk. He couldn't hold it like he used to. He'd taken too many hits to the head. "Zimius, we're sorry. We pushed too hard, But Zimius couldn't hear him. He was red and breathing heavily, and his lips were all the way drawn back. All right, he was saying. He said it again. "All right, let's do this, Clytus. Let's get this over with." "What?" Clytus was still sitting. "You're going to fight me, Zimius?" We're not fighting," said Belacris. "We're all on the same side." "Don't be such a woman," Clytus told him. "You're just a bully, Clytus," said the Greek. "You're a bully and a coward, and I'll prove it." "How?" It was all coming down. They were all each other had had, for 11 years. Belacris had to stop himself from whimpering. "Please, can we just stop?" "Shut up," said the other two. "Well, how do you intend to prove a better man coward, you spineless little Greek?" Zimius's grimace knotted into something like a smile. "Ha, ha! The great bird of Africa." The great bird of Africa. When the great king's poachers found it in the papyrus maze of the Blue Nile by night, some of them, Egyptians, thought they'd encountered Thoth, the god of equilibrium who was always shown with an ibis head, or a baboon's. This creature that they had found looming in the shadow seemed halfway between both. Much taller than any man, it hunched in the moonlight of that far land with rough plumage round its shoulder like an old man's cloak, with long legs sliding silent through the black, brackish water, with eyes like golden discs around their pools of black. It clattered its beak as it came for them, and the sound was low and heavy, for that beak was wide as a shovel and long as a sword, and it came down to a point like a horseman's pick. Not all the poachers returned home alive, and when the survivors brought that great bird, shackled 3,000 miles to the menagerie of Darius, they placed it in an iron cage. It strode ceaselessly back and forth within, rattling its beak against the bars, staring with its yellow eyes at any who looked upon it, and devouring any creature placed within its cage, alive or dead. When the army of Alexander had first come through this way, the soldiers had kept the bird starved for 2 weeks, and then had forced a slave girl through. It had been quite a show. Now the 3 of them stood before that cage again, and somewhere in the foliage, so black a great shadow stalked, and somewhere in the stink that hung about its cage, a pair of flat yellow eyes blinked slowly. The hair raised itself on the backs of the soldiers' necks, and these men, who had faced death the world over, felt a terrible fear upon them. It crawled beneath their skin. Then they heard a low sound echo from the darkness. 5 hollow taps, like a mallet banging tacks into a skull. And then another 5, and then another, the dreadful clatter of the creature's beak, along with an ancient rumble from its huge throat. Zimius turned to the Macedonians, and you could tell from his moonlit sheen of sweat that he was afraid, but he was also excited, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet and showing his teeth. Slowly, he raised one arm and looked to the cage, and the other 2 understood. And Clytus sneered and removed a gold torque from his bicep and handed it to Belacris. And he raised one bare arm as well. "Hold on," said Belacris. "This has gone too far." But though he tried to put an edge in his voice, the other 2 never even looked at him. Their hard eyes locked as they approached the cage, and the great dark shadow in the foliage beyond. When had it happened? Belacris wondered. When had they come to hate so much? He'd thought that it had all been play. Now they were at the bars. Those bars were spaced widely enough for a man to slide his arm through, but not wide enough for him to remove it quickly. Zimius thrust his arm through first, staring up at Clytus, and his eyes flashed as he saw the fear on the other man's face. Then Clytus shot out his jaw and thrust his own arm through. "This is enough," Belacris shouted. "You've both proven your point. Just stop, and let's go back and have a drink." But neither answered. It was all too late, and neither did anything but stare the other down as the great bird stepped forth, darkness out of darkness, with a face like an ape or a stork or a god. And neither flinched when the great beak clacked shut within inches of their clenched fists, and neither reacted when Belacris begged a final time for them to stop. He turned his back. He didn't see that moment when the beak came down, and the skin tore, and the bones split, and the flesh ripped loose, as Zimius tried to wrench himself away, howling and howling, while the bird dragged him again and again into the bars of the cage. He didn't see as Clytus laughed and laughed, pointing at Zimius, while the Greek screamed and passed out from the loss of blood, and forgetting, in triumph, to withdraw his own arm. And he didn't see the surprised look on Clytus's face as the bird turned on him as well, and splintered the bones of his arm before he could withdraw, and use the toughness of his own muscle to drag him to the armpit through the bars, where he could not escape, and where the bird could get his neck. Then there was quiet in the king's menagerie. There was the rip and ring and pop of gristle, and the gentle scissoring of flesh, and nothing else. When Belacris finally dared to turn and see, only the great bird of Africa looked back, its yellow eyes fulfilled among the crimson-soaking plumes. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/The Wrong Station for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station, or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.